actually were planning on making Aliyah in 2000. The Intifada happened. We moved to Australia. We lived there for 7 years. We had 3 kids over there. And then 17 years ago, we moved to Israel. We live in Jerusalem in Class 1. And I've been working in private practice as a marriage, family, sex, and trauma therapist. Actually started out as a marriage and family therapist, and I was slowly taking on other trainings. 15 years ago, I studied trauma therapy, started studying trauma therapy. And one of the reasons why I decided to study trauma therapy was I got to see how so many of the people I was working with, both the individuals as well as the couples, were struggling to either get into relationships or maintain relationships because of traumas from their backgrounds. So I understood that trauma was a very, very important piece that was really missing from my practice over 15 years ago. And then more recently, I also studied sex therapy because that's pretty obvious and that's a pretty important part of relationships, and it wasn't really spoken about or talked enough about in my training. So that was something that I've added on more recently as well. So that's just a little bit about me. We have 4 children, and the eldest is 21. His name is Daniel. He's in the Army. We have a 18-year-old who just finished 12th grade. We have a 17-year-old. He is in Nashville, Tennessee right now, I hope. On a road trip. He's just about to go to year 12, and we have a 10-year-old daughter who is our one Saba. So when it comes to relationships, right? I'm just wondering, I'm just trying to gauge the audience a little bit. I'm going to sort of talk a little bit more, talk to you. You guys are a small crowd, and I want to make sure this is as relevant to you as possible. So, have you ever thought of the following? Have you ever felt feelings of rejection by potential love interests? Have you ever felt unlovable, or like you want to give up on dating? Or have you ever been searching for love for so long and maybe think it won't happen to you? Or think that it's something that only happens to other people? Or think maybe I'm the problem, maybe I'm the one who's always sabotaging my relationships? This is something that happens to a lot of people. You're not alone if any of these thoughts have ever come across your mind. There's so many people who've been out on dates time after time in different relationships. They feel like they just can't figure out, they cannot make sense of what it is that is getting in their way of being able to establish a long-term relationship. And so over time they start to think to themselves, maybe I'm going to be alone forever. And the idea of this talk is to understand that no, we don't have to be alone forever, especially if you understand what the underlying reason is that's been keeping you from establishing a long-term relationship or being able to move through into a long-term partnership. So I'd like to start off with a little story about Clara and Ferdinand. In 1912, Clara was born into a wealthy butcher's family in Krakow. But her entry into this world was marked by tragedy. Her mother died in childbirth. And so as soon as Clara took her first breath, she was already born into trauma. She was the 3rd child with an older brother and a strikingly beautiful sister named Golda. And almost from the start, Clara was constantly compared in an unfavorable way to her sister Golda. And Golda was always praised for her beauty, and Clara was always dismissed as this plain, homely, plain Jane kind of gal. And the loss of her mother really left a void in her family. And her father, being this very established butcher, very busy butcher, he decided to just fill that void by remarrying somebody as quickly as possible. And he didn't even have time to grieve over the loss of his wife. And he had no time or space to even think about his children. So basically, Clara was abandoned 2 times before she was even able to speak. And in essence, she just felt that she was just constantly plagued by this feeling of rejection and this feeling of not good enough. Her father was a busy man, this bustling Krakow city, and and this woman that he remarried, she was also a widow, and she felt very upset about the fact that she had to take on these 3 children, and she didn't really have a husband who was there for her, and she sort of blamed Clara for, she sort of took out all her anger on Clara. Her father sort of inadvertently blamed Clara or put his blame and guilt onto Clara for her mother's death, even though obviously she was just a baby and it wasn't her fault. And so she was constantly plagued by lots and lots of rejection. And obviously this is a very extreme trauma that I'm talking about. But we'll get to a less extreme trauma as we go on as well. yard. Nobody really paid much attention to him. And he was quiet and ambitious. He wanted to forge his own identity. So he came to Krakow to forge his own identity and try to become a man in his own right. And he first noticed Golda. Even though she was married, she had this very magnetic sort of personality. And there was a rumor that maybe her husband had died, and he was sort of hoping to kind of like get in there with her. But she didn't seem to really, she wasn't emotionally available. She thought she was still married. It's one of those kind of weird situations where husbands were traveling a lot for work and so on and so forth. So he decided to steer his eyes onto Clara because he was sort of hopeful that maybe Clara would sort of become like Golda, sort of blossom into her older sister. Now, Clara Lavin-Pell's marriage, it was not a love story. It was really a marriage of convenience. There was a lot of loneliness, a lot of unspoken grief. Both of them had felt unseen and unloved in their families of origin. And at the time, it wasn't uncommon to marriage for practicality. And they were really connecting over their deep emotional attachment wounds, and they didn't realize that. They both had what's called an insecure attachment, and I'm sure many of you have heard of attachment theory. I don't know, it's a buzzword that's going around, attachment theory, right? We'll talk more about that. But basically, when it comes to finding a partner, they were hoping to find someone that was like a bosom buddy, but that would sort of heal their wounds, as opposed to, just being a person within their own right. Children came along. They had a very disjointed family. It was very emotionally barren. Clara, having very little education, she was a house cleaner, and Ferdinand took off and was mostly trying to forge a business. He would travel back and forth to Europe and things like that to provide for the family, but he never really connected in a very deep way to her, which was really her hope and her aspiration to really be a wife and to be, to really be able to build a home with somebody else, not on her own. And they married just before the Holocaust, so whatever wounds they had before the Holocaust were so much more even exacerbated by the Holocaust itself. And so they tried as best as they could to build a home, but they were just so completely shattered that they just weren't really able to. And the traumas that they brought to the relationship just trickled down to the children, and then subsequently to the grandchildren as well. Clara and Ferdinand really seemed to be very mismatched, and they shared this haunting similarity. They both believed that they were unlovable, and without realizing it, each hoped that they would really, as I said, heal their own wounds. And it was just something that was never going to happen without any support and help from other people. They weren't able to express their emotions to each other. They weren't able to self-regulate. They weren't able to be vulnerable to each other. And their unmet needs really collided with each other and just wreaked havoc. So as their grandchild, I felt that pain. And I grew up in the shadow of their suffering. And I made a vow that the trauma is going to end with me, that I am committing to break that cycle. And as a result, I did a lot of therapeutic work for myself and really healed the transgenerational trauma that I saw spilling over. And I feel incredibly proud and incredibly enriched for it. And I feel like I'm really an example for how you don't have to allow trauma, especially transgenerational trauma, to impact us. We can really recognize it. We could, and we could really, by recognizing it, we could work through it, and we could come out so much better and so much stronger for it, and really create a whole different world that's not just a copy-paste of generations before us. So I'd like to shift now and just talk a little bit about how trauma gets stored in our bodies and how it impacts us, and how it really can hijack our minds and our emotions, and how it silently sabotages our ability to build inside of people. And that's really how trauma works. If we're not aware of the fact that we're carrying trauma around, and we're just kind of going through this world, and we're just doing all sorts of things based on a reactive sort of way, then we're just recreating trauma, we're passing trauma around. So each of us really has a responsibility. If we want to really be our best selves and create really good, strong, nourishing, loving relationships, we need to understand our family histories, and we need to work through that so that we don't just cause that imprint to copy-paste again and again. So tonight, I really want to cover the following. I'm going to look at how do we know that trauma is blocking us from finding love. I'm going to look at some examples of trauma that blocks love, like the example that I mentioned before, and I'll mention a few others. I'm going to look at what actions trauma sufferers take. What do we do? What do people who are suffering from trauma, what do we do that gets in the way of love being able to really come into our lives? And I'd like to look at what can trauma sufferers do to overcome those barriers so they can actually find and keep love. I think it's really important to really define what trauma is, right? So trauma is a lasting emotional response that stems from experiencing a distressing event. It can involve feelings of fear, helplessness, or horror. And it can significantly impact a person's sense of safety, our sense of self, our ability to self-regulate, to regulate our emotions, and to build relationships. And it can arise out of a single incident or prolonged exposure to stressful situations. And another thing I think that's really important to know about trauma is that trauma is really magnetic. So when a person experiences a trauma, right, if we're not aware of the fact that we've experienced a trauma, and we don't heal it, and we don't discharge it and release it from our bodies, it can be magnetic. An example would be that if, let's say, we trip and we hurt ourselves, right? So let's say it's a really bad trip, or we really hurt ourselves really badly, and we break our legs. So if we don't really heal that trauma, and I'm not just talking about the physical side, I'm talking about the emotional side, right? We might actually stop going to that place where we tripped. And then if things carry on, we might actually stop, going out of our house altogether. Or we might stop interacting with other people, right? This is a small little example of how trauma can impact us, right? People who kind of, like, if a person gets pickpocketed on a particular street, like, let's say you're on, Jabotinsky Street in Tel Aviv, and a person pickpockets you there, you might say, oh, well, I've never gone to Jabotinsky Street again. And that would make a lot of sense, right? But it might have reverberations, it might have other actions, and it also might make us more at risk of being open to that same trauma again. We're not really aware of what it was that made us so vulnerable to that trauma in the first place. Yes?
When you say magnetic,
Yes.
examples you gave were pushing away.
Yes.
Controls the magnetic and attraction as well.
Yeah, exactly. They can, because a person, like, let's say a person has, if the person seems like, how people say, you look like an easy target, right? Not particularly, but some people, like, they just look like, they're kind of punched over, they look like and so that person looks like, I can take that person down really easily, like they're moving around like they're trauma bound. So that's what I mean by trauma being magnetic. But we might not be aware that we've got a sign on our forehead that says, trauma, please come here. But that's really what does happen. We're not really aware of how we are putting ourselves out there in the world. Okay, so what is relational trauma? This is how unhealed trauma. So, like I said, if a person goes through some sort of trauma, pickpocketing, who knows what, whatever, it can really affect our sense of self-worth. We can think to ourselves, why on earth did I have to experience that terrible thing? And then we might make all sorts of meaning about that. Or we might feel a lack of worthiness that we can't tolerate conflict. We might really just, anytime someone tries to ask us a question about something, we might see that as someone having a go at us as opposed to someone just trying to understand us. We might put our own needs aside and just put other people ahead of our needs, right? We might become very people-pleasing. We might be always fearful of what might happen next, so we might be less risk-taking. And we might not go to different places. Like lots of times I hear people on dates, they'll say to me, that's it, I'm done with dating, I dated all these guys or these girls, they just treat me like garbage, blah, 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 blah. everything, is it? Yeah.
It's a big room and the mazgan makes noise in there.
Yeah. Cheery. Is there a microphone by any chance?
Wait, can we turn off on the mazgan maybe for that? That's fine with that?
Let's see what water, right?
Or we could turn it on. That's whatever you prefer.
Yeah, I don't know how, we might start melting. Okay. Everybody hear me now? Yeah, that's good.
Thank you.
Plus, I'm speaking a lot today, so. All right. Okay, so what does your love life look like if you suffer from emotional trauma? So these are the different things. There's a lot of different ways in which you might be affected by trauma and how our love life might suffer as a result. You might have difficulty you might have difficulty believing that a partner wants good things for us. You might have a fear of disappointing other people. You might think that you might feel that if a person is challenging us intellectually, that maybe they're having a go at us as opposed to just wanting to have an intellectual dialogue. You might feel a sense of helplessness or hopelessness. You might misconstrue kindness for taking advantage of us. We might think that someone wants to manipulate us. We might over-connect with people who want to betray us because that's what we're used to, right? That's like the magnetic thing that I was talking about before, right? We feel that if we've been treated badly for a long time, then we're just going to recreate that again and again. We're just going to try to find people who we feel are like kind of kindred spirits, and that's what's familiar to us. We might see a lack of options. We might go to a room, we might go to a singles event, for instance, and nix every single person there. We might not be able to make any friends or see any possibility in that event because we might think to ourselves, well, no one's going to be good enough for me, or I'm not going to be good enough for them. And we might make all sorts of miscalculations about our ability to establish relationships with people or see possibilities in others. And if we're in a relationship with someone and things start to get really close, we might actually start to feel terrified. We might pull back, we might start ghosting, we might start making excuses, we might start overworking, we might start doing all sorts of things in order to run away from that fear of getting too close. And we might feel a lack of openness to connection altogether. As I said, things might feel too good, we might start running away, we might have a lack of spiritual openness, right? We might not even believe that there's something above us that's actually looking out for us. Then we get into commitment difficulties, disconnection, you name it. These are pretty much all the things that happen if we're suffering from some sort of emotional trauma. So these are really, I'm not going to ask anybody here, but these are things that I think almost all of us have experienced in some way or another. And I think it's important to really identify which of these things we might be holding around, which of these things are really impacting our ability to get into a relationship. And I find that the hardest one to really own up to is the fear of intimacy, because it's an interesting thing, because we're all really built for connection. We all idealistically or ideologically, we want to connect with somebody, but it's also the scariest thing to do if it's something that we're not really used to. It's something we really haven't really done before in a way where we really felt held and safe and looked at and cared for, especially by our primary caregiver. So these are really important things to be aware of. And then, of course, the sum of all of that is that we feel that no romantic relationship possibilities are available to us. So I'd like to talk a little bit now about how trauma blocks our ability to find love. So I'm sure most of you are familiar with the whole flight, fight, and freeze concept, and there's also now a concept of fawning as well, which we'll get to. But the way that flight works, we have a flight response to trauma, is we might start to overwork. We might start to overthink things, right? When things start to look really good, we might start to think, oh, yeah, that guy might be really great for me, but maybe we're not religiously quite on the same level, or maybe he's not as tall as I had expected him to be, or maybe his family isn't quite the right background, or maybe culturally we'll be too different. We'll come up with all the excuses under the sun and try to mix being with them. And then we get a little bit OCD, or we get a little bit perfectionistic, or we'll have difficulty sitting still on a date. We'll kind of be running out or texting our friend in the middle, like, oh, I was going to go with a friend. We'll make up all these sort of excuses to try to run away or try to not meet up with this right? It might say, why do you have to do things that way? You know, we might really get very overly harsh and critical, and we might be a little bit of a bully, or get explosive. You know, we might have irritability, or we might be very judgy, or we might slam doors or self-harm, right? These are some of the angry sort of fight responses that we might have in a relationship. And of course, there's the freeze response, which very often, this often looks like commitment phobia, right? Lots of times people will feel it's hard to make a decision and they'll just be trapped in this space of a decision. But what you really need to know is if you feel like you're having a hard time making a decision about somebody, maybe it's really a trauma response. Maybe it's not that you're having a hard time making a decision. Maybe it's just you're flooded by fear. And so the way that you're dealing with it is you're just shutting down your brain and not allowing yourself to really connect with those very scary feelings of maybe this person really is the one. And I've seen this happen so many times. And sadly, I'm really seeing this now more than ever, the chayalim that I'm working with. Chayalim who are either dating or in a relationship. Sometimes they're out there, you know, they're out in battle, and they're getting very close to their comrades, to their fellow, you know, soldiers. And the reason why that is because when we're at war, our hormones are pouring through our bodies, right? We've got cortisol and adrenaline and oxytocin. And oxytocin is the hormone that actually makes us feel connected to people. It's the thing that comes through mothers when they're having babies. It's what helps babies and moms connect with each other. This happens out on the battlefield as well. And so they overconnect with their fellow fighters, but then they come out of the battlefield and they feel so connected with their fellow people that they're fighting with, and then they feel disconnected from their wives because they've overconnected there and they don't realize. And this is a very, very important message that people really do need to understand. And so it's really, really dynamic on people really being able to form relationships because we are experiencing so much trauma from this, you know, year and a half, 600, God knows how many days of this war that we've been through. So this freeze response shuts us down and makes us feel like we can't commit, we can't move forward, and it makes us feel really exhausted. And sometimes you'll find that you need to sleep a lot more. That's what a lot of us are feeling right now. We feel like we need more sleep than we've ever needed before. So that's the freeze response. The fawn response is one where we feel like we'll never really feel good enough for anybody, so we have to go over and above in order to try to get into people's lives. But then people feel like it's love bombing, right? We'll sort of be like, you know, those people who are like yes people. They'll say yes to whatever you say, and it's like a little bit ick, a little bit like this feels like too nice and too fake. That's the fawning response, and that's a trauma response as well. The person feels that they're not worthy of love, and they just feel that they have to be very positive and optimistic, and everything's so fantastic, and they're not really in touch with the reality of how they're feeling, right? They just become over pleasing, over positive, and what ends up happening is they can develop codependent relationships where they're just trying to help somebody else, but they're not actually in touch with what it is that they need for themselves, and they just don't know how to, they just kind of don't have this balance between themselves and other people, and then they sort of establish what's known as like an enmeshed sort of relationship, which we'll talk about more when we get to the attachment side of things. So attachment. How does your attachment style impact your relationships, and how does trauma, attachment trauma, how does that impact your relationships? Yes, you want to ask a question?
Yeah, I don't know if you want to wait till the end for questions, but
Oh, we can go.
perfect.
Yeah.
I believe there's 4. Do we change attachment style through our lives? Is it something you can quote unquote improve if you're a really avoidant person? Maybe you'll get uncertain. Yeah, that's something I'd like to touch upon.
Those are really excellent questions.
Appreciate it.
There's a lot of questions that we still don't know about attachment styles, but generally speaking, I think that we have early attachments that then can change as we get older. But there's generally 4 different attachment styles. There's secure, anxious, avoidant, and disorganized. Those are the 4 primary attachment styles. Does everybody know about attachment styles? Should I give a little tutorial? Yeah, okay. So let's say little Johnny, I usually use Johnny. Okay, we'll use a different name. Little Schmully. How many Schmullies in the room, right? Oh no. Little Sammy, little David, Bobby. There's no Bobbies in the room. Okay, little Bobby's going to gun, and this little Bobby has a very secure attachment with his mom. And little Bobby is so happy to hold his mom's hand and go to gun. And as he's going to gun, he's hopping and skipping along. He's really positive, and he's got this really wonderful, lovely energy. And everybody loves little Bobby because he's just this really lovely little child, and everybody wants to connect with him. And the reason why is because Bobby has a very wonderful, secure attachment with his mom. He feels that his mom, as a primary caregiver, is the person that really has his back. And she's the person that he can go to if he ever has a hard time. And so when he goes off to gun, he plays with all the little children, all the little kids. Everybody wants to play with Bobby because he is the bee's knees. The gunetta loves him, the kids love him. He knows how to share with the other kids. He knows how to have a good time. He feels really good and strong and positive in his own skin. That's a secure attachment style. That's what we would all love to be, and that's what we're all aiming for. And that's something with a lot of really great therapy, we can get to little Bobby.
Okay, Bobby.
But sometimes we aren't as lucky as little Bobby. Sometimes we're like little Jackie. We're like little Jackie, right? And Jackie has an anxious attachment style. And Jackie's anxious attachment style is such because he doesn't really feel that his parents really have his back, and particularly his mom. His mom went back to work way too quickly. She has a very high stress job. She really has a hard time balancing work and being present for him. And as a result, he really kicks up a storm. He often throws tantrums, and he's constantly knocking over his toys, and he just doesn't really feel that his mom is really there for him. When this little boy goes to gun, he'll often be sort of testing his relationships with the gunnettes, with the other kids. He'll go over, knock over someone's toys, and think that that's going to somehow make them love him. They hate him even more, of course. But little Jackie thinks that he's constantly testing his boundaries. He's testing people's love because he never really felt that anybody was there for him. So that's little Jackie. Then we move over to little, throw me a name.
Susie.
Little Susie. Okay, yeah, let's use a girl. Little Susie. Okay. Little Susie has an avoidant attachment style, right? And little Susie's mom just wants to get rid of her as quickly as she can. She's just totally objectionable all the time. She can't wait to get rid of her as fast as possible, and Susie can't wait to get away from her as quickly as possible as well. She'll go to gun. She'll sort of sit in a corner. She tells herself she's going to be little Miss Independence, and she doesn't need anybody. And there's something very attractive about Susie in terms of the fact that she seems so self-sufficient and so independent, except when little Jackie, the anxiously attached boy, goes over to little Susie, and she says, piss off, I don't have anything to do with you. He actually wants her even more. And then he tries to really establish a relationship with her even more because he sees her as like, this is a challenge, game on, I'm going to get little Susie to like me. And then he'll try to pull her hair and put tape in her hair and put glue on her chair and drive her crazy. And she's like, get away from me, I don't really need you, I don't want you, I don't need anybody because I'm just good enough without anybody. But the thing is, the secure people don't really like Susie because she's so in her own world that you can't get close to her. Like there's something very attractive on one hand about little Susie, that she seems so self-sufficient, but when you really get close, she really pushes you away. And it's really hard to form a real relationship with Susie. So the anxiously attached people will love Susie, but the secure people and the avoidant people in particular, they can't really get near Susie because she's got all these walls built around her. Then we move over to the disorganized attached child. Let's call the disorganized attached child little Ricky. Sandra. Ricky. Little Ricky. Little Ricky. It could be, boy, girl, whatever. It doesn't matter. Little Ricky has a disorganized attachment style. Now, little Ricky's, one of his parents is really not involved, and he was sort of bumped up to being like on the same level of parenthood as his mother, right? Because his father wasn't really around. And so he's going to become an adult way before his time. And so he's never really had an opportunity to really be a child. And as a result, he kind of doesn't really know how to be a child. He doesn't know how to play with other children. He doesn't know how to really be. You won't really see the disorganized child in gun. You'll see that child more like in high school and their childhood. And they have this deep longing to go back and be childlike and be irresponsible, but they kind of missed that boat. And so they find it really, so they'll constantly, they kind of don't know which way they're going. Actually, I think Ryan wants, you know, I want to get more into the disorganized attachment style. So basically, the way that these styles, this is the way the style would look. Like, let's say your partner would hurt you, right? They would say, not hurt you physically. Let's say they would inadvertently say something like, you know, that shirt doesn't look that great on you, right? And people could take that in many different ways. They could see that as, oh my God, I can't believe you don't like this shirt. Or they could see that as, okay, screw you, that's your problem. You know, you can take it many different ways, right? So let's say a secure person is in a relationship with someone and their partner says something that hurt their feelings. So their unconscious belief would be, I trust that I'm worthy of love. So this is just a temporary state. I'm sure that he didn't mean what he was saying, and we'll be able to repair this, and all will be well. And the vulnerable emotions are, my feelings are hurt, but I really trust that I'm safe, right? Along those lines. And their protective feelings will be, you know, my discomfort is real, but I don't have to allow this to define me. I don't have to allow it to overwhelm me, or I don't need that person's statement to really put me down. And so the way that they'll deal with this is that they'll talk about it, they'll express how they feel, and then they'll seek some sort of reconnection and resolution. Like, you know, when you told me that that shirt would bend on me, like, did you mean I should burn the shirt? Did you think I should never wear a shirt again? I should never wear a dress? Like, they'll try to reason with the person, really try to gain an understanding about what's going on in the other person's head, because they actually want to have a connection with this person. They don't want to just throw this person away, right? And that's what a securely attached person looks like in a relationship. And moving over to an anxiously attached person, their partner said something that hurt their feelings. Their unconscious belief will be, I'm not lovable. This is just proof that I'll never be able to, my partner will never love me. I'll never care about my feelings. They will never see me. And they go on. They create all these stories in their heads about how things are going to go for them. And then their vulnerable emotions are, I feel so rejected, so sad, so alone, I'm being abandoned, and you know, everything's just going to fall apart, right? They don't even have any hope that they're going to be able to resurrect their relationship. They're already thinking, I've already got to get a next singles event and find myself another partner because that relationship is over. And their protective feelings are, I feel so mad. How did that person say this to me? And my feelings feel really big and they feel overwhelming. And so when they were to have a conversation with their partner about their hurt feelings, they'd show a lot of anger, they'd show indignation, they'd be blaming, they'd be criticizing, they'd be protesting, they'd be saying, you're such a this and you're such a that, and da 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 da. And that relationship probably wouldn't have a great chance of surviving because the other person would feel pushed away and say, hang on sister, you're way too much for me, right? So then we move over to the avoidantly attached person in the relationship. And this person, their unconscious belief is, if they're not happy to be with me, you know, if my partner isn't happy about something, then that might mean that I might actually be a failure. Maybe there's something really wrong with me. And the vulnerable emotions are, I feel rejected, I feel alone, I'm so disconnected from these feelings. It's as if those feelings aren't there at all. It's like it feels like on the one hand they feel like a failure, but on the other hand, they don't really allow themselves to take in those emotions because they feel so overwhelming to them. So they kind of dissociate and disconnect from those emotions. And so the protective feelings are, I'm mad, but I don't know, you know, I don't really want to deal with it. And I'm just going to pretend that those feelings aren't there. And so then in the context of relationship, their behavior will be one where they'll just kind of pretend like it didn't happen, or they'll try to appease their partner, or they'll just, they'll tell their partner, oh yeah, it's okay that you criticized how I look, it's okay that you think I'm a schlub, but deep down they might be seething inside because they don't know how to really express how it is that they're feeling. So they'll pretend that they don't care, and they'll be like this passive aggressive thing happening. Anybody relate to any of these things? Okay. Right, so we're starting to know who we are. Okay, so then now we're up to the disorganized attachment. So as I said, the disorganized attachment style, that doesn't even come up in the first three. And in fact, John Bowlby, who I didn't mention mention yet tonight, John Bowlby, who is the godfather of attachment theory, he didn't even mention disorganized attachment theory in any of his works because he was really looking at just small children, and disorganized attachment theory came up really through Hazen and Shaver, who were the guys who really studied romantic attachment styles. I just would like to say a little bit about John Bowlby because I feel like we should give a little bit of credit to this guy who developed this the Bible of attachment styles. He was from English royalty. He was a psychiatrist. He was born into English royalty. He was abandoned by his nanny. He was really raised by a nanny, and he was to whatever reason his parents let the nanny go. The nanny didn't even say goodbye or anything. She just took off, and he was completely gutted because he had no relationship with his mother. Back then, this is I think in the 1920s or maybe even earlier. Children were seen and not heard, and he wasn't able to really express his feelings. So he developed a real avoidant attachment style, and he realized that there was something very not right about the way that he was growing up, and he really found it really difficult to connect with other people. He was sent to boarding school. He had a hard time attaching to people. He did actually go on to get married and have a family of his own, but the idea he did a lot of research on children in hospital settings. And back then in England, right, they didn't, when you went to a hospital, right, unless your parents lived near the hospital, right, if your parents lived far out in the countryside, you didn't get to stay over in the hospital as a parent. And so very often, these kids would be left for weeks or months in hospital with all sorts of illnesses. And they slowly were starting to disconnect with their parents, and they were just connecting in whatever way they could with the nurses. And sometimes they didn't establish connections with the nurses because the nurses were so busy tending to all the patients. And sometimes, nurses, they don't really have time to really be there for the kids. And so he got to really study how these kids were, how their attachment styles were changing as a result of being in this hospital system. And he saw the difference between the children whose parents lived close by and who visited frequently, and the children whose parents lived far out in the countryside. And he got to see how their attachment styles had changed over time, being in the hospital setting. Anyway, so moving on to the disorganized attachment style. So a person who's got this disorganized attachment style, they just feel that they're completely at a loss most of the time. They deeply want, like everybody, they deeply want to form a loving relationship with somebody, but they just don't feel that anybody can be trusted because time after time they've been proven that nobody can be trusted, they will never feel safe, they will always feel like they're under attack, they feel rejected and abandoned, and they're afraid, and they always feel like they're emotionally in danger. And they'll often feel this underlying rage or afraid or conflicted feeling. They feel such a range of different emotions. And oftentimes, as much as they try to contain these emotions, sometimes these emotions will boil over. And they'll go from one extreme to another. They're all over the place. When it comes to sharing, when it comes to talking to people, they don't know how to be vulnerable. And they don't know how to, they don't feel safe feeling vulnerable because they don't feel safe in their own skin because safety is something that has never been modeled to them by really very much anybody. And so even when they do get into a relationship, oftentimes they will sabotage the relationship very, very quickly on because they don't really feel worthy of love. And I do want to say, by the way, before any of you freak out, only about 4%, supposedly, according to Diane Heller, who is a major attachment style psychologist in the field today, she says that roughly only 4% of people do fall into this category. Although I definitely have my fair share of clients who do fall in this category. And it is something that sometimes people with a lot of grit and a lot of desire, they can heal from this, although it takes a lot of effort in order to overcome these things. So an unhealed attachment style is very much like a record player. You guys all know what a record player is. I think that's how a record player is. You know how record goes round. hear a mouse like that, right? That's, I mean, twist your ankle, that's kind of a shock trauma. Or something that happens very suddenly, right? That's like a shock trauma. Here, have a seat right here. This one's big right for you.
I have PTSD, so I just want to see what you guys were.
Right on time. Okay, so this is the list of all the different possible things. Right, so what people often think PTSD is that they believe that it's something that it's like not being able to move or not being able to move after a traumatic event, but it's actually it's made up of so many different components and so many different parts. And any one of these different things can be a PTSD symptom, right? So for the most part, the pink bits, right? It's kind of annoying, it's hard for you to see this between pink and green. I should show the different colors, but the pink ones are the ones that are most people will have, right? So the pink ones are unwanted memories, negative self-image, hypervigilance, sense of threat, avoidance of isolation, feeling easily scared, flashbacks, nightmares. These are the typical things that most PTSD sufferers will have, right? And those are the things that we really need to be aware of. And all these things we really need to be aware of. And we want to be aware of them as soon as close to trauma as we can. Obviously, developmental trauma, being that it's a long-term trauma, it's not something you're going to just hit and kill in a second, right? So the shock trauma is the thing that you really want to get to as soon as possible, because otherwise it does linger and wreak havoc. So the other types of PTSD responses, in the little orange bits that are less likely, are emotional distress, intrusive thoughts, right? And intrusive thoughts are those things where you might think, let's say you went on a date with somebody and they ghosted you. And you'll just have this thought over and over again, oh my God, I must be such a terrible person, I must be such a loser, I must be all the bad things we can say about ourselves. Those are the intrusive thoughts that play on that record player. That's constantly stuck, and we need that arm to move over for. Anger, guilt, shame, anxiety, depression, excessive blame, dissociation. Right? Dissociation is where we don't feel connected to ourselves. And because the trauma feels so overwhelming, we can't let those feelings in. And so we just we sort of flake out. And that's dissociation is probably one of the most dangerous aspects of PTSD, because we're not really living in this world. And if we're not really connected to our feelings, and we're not really, we don't heal the symptoms of PTSD, right? What happens is we're actually at greater risk of recreating this. That's where the magnetic stuff comes in, when it comes to mentioning before, right? That's what we really need to be aware of, what PTSD symptoms are, or any traumatic symptoms are. We need to figure out where it's in our bodies and heal it. I bet we're going to get into what you want to ask, because now I'll let you ask anyway.
I can do it at the end.
No, go for it.
Just because it's from a medical perspective.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's more people to have features of PTSD.
Sure.
It doesn't necessarily mean they're above the threshold to be diagnosed with a sort of PTSD.
Yeah.
It's also
It's a range.
It's the analysis, it's also the time scale after the traumatic event as well. So it can be normal healthy reaction to having some of those things after the trauma doesn't always equate to within PTSD.
Yes.
PTS features.
That's right.
And there's also this new evidence after a trauma
Yes.
can go to people some time to try and process
Yes.
before kind of over-analyzing and therapizing
Right.
post-trauma.
You're right, Johnny. You're absolutely right. Thank you. You're absolutely correct. Thank you for saying that. You're absolutely very right.
Yeah, most people don't want to talk about that stuff right after.
Yeah.
Kind of people want to start leave them alone, and then all right, I should probably talk to somebody about it.
Yeah. No, but what John was saying is absolutely spot on. That we maybe do need a little bit of time to kind of process it within ourselves. But that's the thing, that's the trick. You've got to process it a little bit yourself. You've got to be with yourself and process it. And that's something that so many of us, like you're saying, sorry, what's your name? Joey, right. So we've got Johnny and Joey here. Perfect. So like Joey's saying is that you don't want to. Like the pain is so great, whatever it is you experience. We just want to feel like that. We don't want to deal with it. And the thing is, if we don't really give ourselves that time and space to really process whatever it is that we've experienced, that's when the lingering impacts of the trauma really get deep into our kishkas, and that's when it gets hard and it can get intractable. So that is the truth. But you're absolutely right. That is the medical advice now is to not jump straight to your therapist's office. It's to sort of process it a little bit yourself, give it a little bit of time, see if maybe some of these symptoms, certainly the sleeplessness or the excessive, even the dissociation, things like that, but you don't want to let them linger for too long. And PTSD is, the sort of definition of PTSD is if these symptoms have persisted for more than a month's time, right? So obviously if it's just, a week or two or a few days after you've experienced whatever that trauma is, fine, give it a little bit of time and notice it, right? Like I can give you an example. Last week I was walking with this dog that we're looking after, and this dog is it's a big heavy dog, and anytime it sees a cat or a bird, it just goes bananas, and it just like totally flipped me over, and I fell on my backside. And luckily, like I was able to tend to it because I knew that if I don't tend to it straight away, so it could persist. It could really affect my walking for who knows what. I'll need physio for God knows how long. So because I'm very aware of this, and we'll get into how to heal trauma, I was able to sort of heal it, and now I'm in a much better place because I really tended to it and I looked after it. And that's what we really need to do. We really need to tend to look after our traumas, that it doesn't percolate and develop into other things. So trauma has shut down our inner compass and robbed the PTSD sufferer from imagining that they can create something better, right? And this is what we see. This is another line from Lavin-Pell I mentioned earlier, that basically when we experience PTSD, we don't see possibilities. That is really one of the defining features of the PTSD sufferer, is that they don't believe that there's a world out there that can be better for them. They kind of live their lives really small, right? Like we talked about earlier, about the person who is pickpocketed, and they're on Jabotinsky Street, and something to say, oh, that's it. Jabotinsky Street is finished with me. I'm never going there. And next thing you know, they're not going to even re-roll, and next thing you know, they're not going to the beach, and next thing you know, they're not going to the Lipinski, and the next thing you know, they're not going to any bars anymore. Next thing you know, they don't have a life. And they become a complete social hermit. And that's the danger. So that's the thing that we need to really be aware of, is are we making our lives small, or can we allow ourselves to really see beyond that and see different possibilities? With our ability to love is blocked. We don't see possibilities, we go into our shell, we feel disconnected, we numb out, we become robotic, we become more isolated, we shut down. So one thing that people don't realize is that PTSD symptoms are actually your protective response, right? The reason why we do the things that we do aren't because we're bad people. And the reason why other people who have PTSD do the things they do aren't because they're bad people either. We do the things that we do because we're trying to just protect ourselves. So people might keep away from other people, not because they don't like you, but because they're scared, right? They might steer clear of things that are unknown because they just feel terrifying. They might mistrust kindness because it's something that they just don't know, and they might mistake it for manipulation. And you might say to yourself, I can't handle bad things because the unknown is too terrifying for me. And so you might stop taking risks, you might stop really taking chances and move out there. And this is something I see with couples that I work with all the time. There's this concept of the pursuer and the withdrawer. The pursuer and the withdrawer. This is something that was created by Sue Johnson and Leslie Greenberg. They created this concept of emotionally focused couples therapy. This is something that I practice with the couples that I work with, where the pursuer is the person who has the anxious attachment style. And they're the ones that are going to fight for everything, right? When they feel their partner isn't coming home on time, they're going to call their partner a billion times, they're going to call them every swear word under the sun. You're such a this, and you're such a that, and why are you coming home, and why don't you want to be with me? And then the withdrawer is like, whoa, this is too scary, I'm staying away. And they stay at work later and later and later. And each of those people are doing things as a means of protecting themselves. The pursuer is fighting for the relationship. They think that by shouting and screaming and swearing at their partner, that that's a way of fighting for love. And the withdrawer thinks that by staying away, staying out of harm's way, staying underneath the radar, they think that that's a way of protecting themselves. Each of them end up, and they get into this vicious cycle. The more that the pursuer feels abandoned and neglected, the more they fight as a means of trying to create that connection. And the more that they fight to create the connection, the more that the withdrawer then feels that they have to just hunker down and stay away because they feel like a failure, they feel like a loser, they feel like they're never going to own up to whatever it is that their partner wants. And so they do this thing to protect, they do the withdrawing thing as a means of protecting themselves. And then they end up this loop, this cycle, that they just can't work out how to get out of. So, this is the real reason why you guys came to this talk. Why you came just at the right time, Joey.
I was just walking by.
Oh,
I
perfect.
wasn't intending on stopping.
Oh, great. Well,
I just saw PTSD and I'm like, oh, it's like a listening, like a selective site.
Oh, perfect. You came to the right place. Okay, so how do we reverse PTSD? And how do we embark on trying to apply it? So Dan Siegel wrote this book called Mindsight, and he came up with this very famous, very important line. He said, you've got to name it to tame it. Meaning, in order to really be able to heal from trauma, you've got to put a label on it, you've got to recognize it, you've got to be aware of it. You've got to know the reason why I am not finding love is because of X, because I'm being a bitch. Because and not the reason why I'm being a bitch is because I felt unlovable because my mother was never there for me, my parents didn't do this, my parents got divorced, I didn't have a lot of friends, I was bullied, I was this, I was that, I'm trying out all sorts of things, right? These are all the reasons why I feel I'm not capable of love. Once you are able to identify what is blocking you, you then have the ability to turn it around. Because then you have that awareness. And just knowing where and how this trauma is blocking you, you then have the ability to discharge it and release it from your body. Right? So this is the aim of the game. It's about really being able to be, really, like we were saying before, Joey, right? We were saying, like, it's too hot, it's too painful to deal with this stuff, right? I don't want to deal with this crap, it's too much. But we have to, if we're going to really reverse it. We're really going to turn things around. So how do we heal trauma? And this is how I work. Right now, these 7 points really this is the main meat and potatoes of how I work with people who are experiencing trauma. Right? And it's called somatic experience therapy, and it's developed based on Peter Levine's. Sorry, did I say something?
It's called what?
Somatic experience therapy, right? And it's based on Peter Levine's work. Peter Levine is a psychiatrist. He's based in LA, and he wrote a book called Waking the Tiger. And that's his first book. He's had many other books since, but basically, he discovered that people who have trauma that's trapped inside of their bodies. And what we need to do in order to get to the trauma is we need to bypass the neocortex. We need to bypass the rational thinking part of our brains. And this is why oftentimes talk therapy alone isn't going to cut it. Because we're just talking head to head, but the trauma is really trapped in the reptilian part of the brain, the very back part of our brain, which is then connected to the central nervous system, right? And maybe a little tutorial about how it works. Basically, let's say this is the human brain, right? This band here, right? So let's say just by the thumb area, this is the reptilian part of the brain. And the reptilian part of the brain is responsible for fight, flight, freeze, and basic bodily functions. And then over that, we've got the limbic system, which is the emotional half of the brain. And that's supposed to sit there right above the reptilian. And then above that, we have the neocortex, the rational part of the brain. And when we experience some sort of trauma, everything just jumps out of whack, right? And then the neocortex isn't functioning, and the limbic system isn't functioning, and all we're really left with is the reptilian part of the brain, which is connected to the central nervous system, which is made up of the sympathetic and the parasympathetic nervous system. Now, I'm not going to get all slides here. I guess we have a doctor here, but I'm sure some of you guys are medical people as well, and you probably know way more medicine than I do. But sympathetic nervous system, the long and the short of it is that it helps all of our organs to function properly, right? And so when we experience some sort of trauma, things will go into hyper or hypotrophy. So our breathing might get more shallow or might get quick. Our heart rate might bounce out of our bodies. Our digestion might slow down or speed up. Our sex drive might go hyper or hypo. Our urination, defecation, all our organs might start, or even just one of our organs might go out of whack. And then that starts to completely discombobulate us and mess us up, right? And so what we need to do is we need to get the parasympathetic in. The parasympathetic is the guy that comes in and says, okay guys, trauma's over, you guys can go all back to your normal daily functioning, then your organs start to Jerusalem in my office in Jerusalem. I'll turn on some nice beach sounds. You can go over to the beach after this, or you can just imagine that we're on the beach right now. You can imagine, you can close your eyes, and just imagine you're sitting in, what is that over there? Is that Gordon Buffer Shop? I can't remember.
That's
Jerusalem Beach? Yeah. Okay. Okay, that'll do. You imagine you're over there on the Jerusalem Beach, just on the side of the Lavin-Pell, and you're watching all the windsurfers, and you're watching people playing mafla and beach volleyball, and maybe there's a few kids over there building some sand castles, and you're noticing the texture of the sand underneath your feet, and you're noticing a nice gentle breeze, and maybe the sun is out, because maybe it's like 5 hours earlier, it's not too hot, because then you've got the nice gentle sunny breeze going on there. And you're feeling nice and calm, and just notice it's like that nice breath that's coming inside of you as you're imagining yourself in this beautiful, serene place. And as you're imagining yourself in this beautiful area, you might want to just notice like one little spot in your body that's just feeling a little out of sorts. Maybe you've got like a little pain in your neck, a little tension in your chest, a little pain in your hip maybe. Right? Maybe there's something in your body that's feeling a little bit of this. And maybe you want to put your hands on that area, or maybe you can put your hands on your chest and your stomach like so. And just try to take 3 breaths in. We're going to take 3 breaths in, hold at the top before and breathe out. Okay? We're going to do it on the count of 3. Okay? In for 3. Hold for 4, 3, 2, 1, and out for 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And just let your breath go. And we're going to do this once again. And in for 3, 2, 1. Hold at the top. 4, 3, 2, 1. Out for 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And just notice your breath going. Notice what it feels like to be in contact with your hands on your chest and on your stomach. And now if you tap into that little pain that you had before, hopefully you didn't choose too big a pain. If you tap into that little pain, hopefully notice that it's shifted. It might have moved, or maybe it's feeling a little bit lighter, a little bit less than it was before. Right? And so if I were to go deeper into the pain, we're not going to do a whole therapy session now because there's just too many of you and I don't even know your names. But if you were in my office, or if you were in, another somatic experience therapist's office, they might start asking you questions about the pain. They'll ask you if there's a color, a shape, a texture. They'll ask you if there's some sort of meaning or image or memory connected to the pain. They'll ask you if you want to do something. There's a behavior that's the belief beside that. Or if there's some sort of emotion that comes up, you might start feeling ulterior or emotional. And then you'll slowly start to release whatever that is as you start to notice the pain. And then the trauma will start to speak, and then it will slowly start to release itself from your body. And then, this is where the real magic happens. Then we create what's called a corrective experience. And there's many ways we could create a corrective experience. We could invite protective allies in, right? We might invite a fairy godmother, or your favorite rabbi, or your favorite therapist, or your favorite grade school teacher, or your favorite grandparent. Or we might imagine you have all the support in the world. All of Tel Aviv is barracking for you and saying, oh, you're the best thing ever. Or you might look at the opposite of what you're experiencing. Let's say you're just dumped by your girlfriend or boyfriend or partner, and you're feeling really horrible and terrible, and you're thinking, I'm never going to find love again. You think, what if you had the opposite problem? What if everybody in Tel Aviv thought you were the hottest in town? And they all want a piece of you, right? And you start to feel, wow, I feel amazing. I feel like a rock star. Woo. You start walking around like you're, Bar Raffaelli or whatever. And then you imagine the best case scenario. That you get to pick it. And you get to choose whatever partner you want. And this is really how healing trauma looks. And it's really beautiful and wonderful experience. It's something that we are all capable of. It's a really wonderful thing to see. That's something that I feel very privileged that I've been able to help so many people, work with thousands of people over the course of 25 years, and it's been a really wonderful, enriching experience. So the other thing is we really need to get outside support, right? We can't do it all on our own. You want to maybe, when we're close to experiencing the trauma early on, yeah, we want to do a little journaling, we want to write about it, we want to talk to a friend. But if we're seeing that things are intractable, we're not moving forward, we're not really achieving what it is that we want, we have that small mind that I talked about, we're not able to get out of our heads and really create the life that we want, then it's time to really get some outside support and try to find people that can really help us move forward in the way that we want. And on that note, are there any questions? Well, such a so curious, Crystal, I'm going to stand for no, it's done. Anybody have any questions about anything I said? I know I threw a lot at you. Well, I really wasn't. John?
So, thank you, it's really amazing talk.
Thank you.
Thanks for the question, which I think I may know the response to, just to check
Sure.
if I'm right or wrong.
Yeah.
It's with the attachment styles.
Sure.
Am I right in thinking that it's also possible that someone could move from, say, a secure attachment
Yes.
because of an acquired trauma later in life,
Yeah.
or traumas,
Yeah.
effect traumas?
Mm-hmm.
Someone's attachment styles in romantic relationships
Yes.
because of experiences and things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. Our attachment styles, I believe our attachment styles can change. And what's really fascinating, and I see this with couples all the time too, especially as they're working with me, a person who might have had an anxious attachment style, like let's say they would have been the pursuer, they could actually be a withdrawer in other areas of their lives. I'll often see this, let's say with a couple, this is very classic, and this is something that Sue Johnson says, you know, she actually passed away years ago. She used to say this all the time, that a woman, like let's say a woman who's like a pursuer in most areas of the relationship, you get her into the bedroom, all of a sudden she's the withdrawer and the husband becomes the pursuer, right? So in different scenarios, you might be an anxiously attached person, or you might be an avoidantly attached person.